She was 25 years old and lived invisible inside her own life, controlled, silenced, erased, until the day when, fleeing yet another argument, she scratches a billionaire CEO's car and leaves a trembling note apologizing. He could have demanded payment, could have ignored it, but he did something completely different. He showed up, and in that unexpected meeting, two wounded souls discovered that true love doesn't save, it sets free. This is the story of Eloise Crawford, a story of courage, passion, and new beginnings, and it all started with a scratch and a note that changed everything. Eloise Crawford was 25 years old and had an impressive ability to become invisible inside her own home. It wasn't magic, it was survival. Sitting in front of the computer that hot Charleston afternoon, she was reviewing photos from a recent wedding, adjusting brightness and contrast with precise, almost robotic movements. Light filtered through the white curtains, drawing soft shadows on the wall, but she barely noticed. Her attention was divided, half on the images on the screen, half on Patrick's footsteps upstairs. He was home, and when he was home, everything needed to be right. Patrick Fuller was 30, square-jawed, and had a smile that fooled everyone, except her. He came down the stairs with that posture of someone about to find something wrong, and he did. "Eloise, what the hell are you wearing?" His voice cut through the silence like a cold blade. She looked down. A simple blouse, faded jeans. Nothing much, nothing wrong, but for him, there was always something. "I was just editing, Patrick. I wasn't going out like this." The answer came out low, calculated, the way she'd learned to speak. No confrontation, no emotion. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't respect yourself, Eloise. How do you expect others to respect you if you walk around looking like that?" She bit her lip. "Hold your breath. Count to 5. Back." It was the ritual that kept her together. Patrick kept talking. Something about her image, about how people were commenting, about how he only wanted the best for her. The words were sharp, but they came wrapped in concern, and that was the worst part, because part of her still wanted to believe he cared, that this was love, just the demanding kind, the kind that hurts because it wants to make you better. But another part, the one she suffocated every day, knew it wasn't. Knew that love doesn't squeeze, doesn't watch, doesn't diminish. The argument escalated. He mentioned her friend Delilah, saying she was a bad influence, that Eloise was changing, getting more difficult. "You weren't like this before," he said, and there was something dangerous in that tone. Eloise felt her chest tighten, the air leave. She needed to get out, needed to breathe. Without thinking much, she grabbed her purse and car keys. "I'm going for a drive." Patrick laughed. Not one of those light laughs, but the kind that carries disdain. "Of course, run away. That's what you do best, isn't it?" She didn't answer, just left. The steering wheel was hot under her trembling hands. Charleston felt suffocating that late afternoon, with its narrow streets and impeccably fronted houses hiding secrets behind closed shutters. Eloise drove without destination, just wanting distance. But her mind wouldn't stop. Is he right? Am I the problem? The tears came, and she wiped them away angrily. She hated crying, hated feeling weak, hated that his voice echoed inside her head even when he wasn't there. That's when it happened. A distraction. 1 second less, and the horrible sound of metal scraping metal. She braked hard. Her heart raced. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw it. A black car, gleaming, expensive, very expensive, parked in front of an art gallery. And a mark. A clear, cruel mark that screamed, "You messed up again." Eloise got out of the car with shaky legs. No one around. The street was empty, almost suspended in that moment between day and night. She touched the scratch with her fingertips as if she could undo it. She couldn't. Of course she couldn't. So she did the only thing she could. Opened her purse, grabbed a crumpled piece of paper and a pen. She wrote quickly, with trembling handwriting. "I'm so sorry for what happened. It was an accident. I can't afford to pay right now, but I offer my photography services as compensation. Eloise Crawford." Left her phone number, tucked the note under the wiper, and ran. That night, lying in bed next to Patrick, who snored as if nothing had happened, Eloise stayed awake staring at the ceiling. Something had cracked. She couldn't quite explain it, but that accident, that hastily left note, seemed to have opened a door she didn't even know existed, a door to the unknown. And for the first time in years, the unknown didn't seem as scary as staying.
Grant Lawson didn't usually waste time on small things. At 34, he'd built a tech company from the ground up, turning lines of code into millions of dollars and a solid reputation in the market. But that morning, standing in front of the art gallery with a crumpled note in his hands, he found himself smiling. It wasn't the scratch on the car that intrigued him. These things happened. It was the way those words trembled on the paper. "I'm so sorry for what happened." There was something there, something real, and Grant had spent too much time in a world of corporate facades not to recognize authenticity when he saw it. He tucked the note into his blazer pocket and dialed the number. Eloise almost dropped her phone when she saw the unknown number on the screen. Her heart raced. It was him. Had to be. She answered with the firmest voice she could muster, but even she noticed a crack in it. "Hello?" On the other end, a deep voice, calm, almost amused. "Eloise Crawford, this is Grant Lawson. I think you found my car yesterday." She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the scolding, for the demand, for another man telling her she'd messed everything up. But what came was different. "Look, I know you offered your services, and I got curious. How about we meet up to talk? No pressure. I just want to understand better what you do." Eloise held her breath, counted to 5. Back. "Okay, where?" They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop in historic downtown Charleston, a discreet place with worn wooden tables and the constant smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet scent of magnolias drifting through the open windows. Eloise arrived 15 minutes early because arriving on time was arriving late in her mind. She ordered tea, coffee made her hand shake even more, and sat with her back to the wall, watching the door. When Grant walked in, she knew immediately it was him. Tall, broad shoulders, impeccable clothes, but there was something in his eyes, exhaustion, or maybe loneliness disguised as control. He saw her and waved, walking to the table with firm, confident steps. "Eloise?" He extended his hand, and she shook it, noticing how his palm was warm, firm, secure. So different from Patrick, who always squeezed too hard as if marking territory. Grant sat down, ordered a double espresso, and got straight to the point. "So, photography. You do this professionally?" She nodded, showing some photos on her phone, weddings, photo shoots, small events. He studied each image with genuine attention, zooming in on details, asking questions. "You capture something most people don't see," he said, handing back the device. "It's not just technique, it's humanity." Eloise felt her face heat up. No one had ever described her work like that. Patrick used to say it was cute, the way you compliment a child's hobby.
Grant leaned back in his chair, holding the small cup between his fingers. "Look, I have a corporate event in 2 weeks. Big, important. I need a photographer who won't just take generic photos of people smiling with champagne glasses. I need someone who tells a story." He paused, studying her reaction. "Would you be interested?" Eloise felt her chest tighten, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something different. Anticipation, maybe. Possibility. She opened her mouth to respond, but Patrick's words echoed. "You're not good enough for those fancy events, Eloise. Stay in your lane." She swallowed hard, looked at Grant, saw that he was waiting, unhurried, without judgment. And then she said, "I'm in." They talked for another hour. Grant spoke about the company, about the pressure to grow fast, to never be allowed to fail. There was a vulnerability there that he let slip without realizing it. as if he were tired of carrying everything alone. Eloise talked about photography, about how each image was an attempt to capture something fleeting, a look, a second, a truth. She didn't mention Patrick, didn't mention the fights, didn't mention that this coffee was the first moment of peace she'd felt in months. But Grant noticed the way she looked at the door from time to time, noticed the tension in her shoulders, noticed that when she truly smiled, it was as if the whole world lit up for an instant.
When they said goodbye on the sidewalk, it was already mid-afternoon. The sun beat down hard on the uneven stones of the street, and Eloise had to shield her eyes with her hand. Grant hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but then just smiled. "Thanks for accepting. I think this event will be different with you there." She smiled back, a small smile, but genuine. "Thank you for giving me the chance." He waved and got into the scratched car, which she noticed he hadn't mentioned once during the entire conversation. As she watched him drive away, Eloise felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was recognition. As if for the first time someone had looked at her and seen more than a mediocre photographer, more than Patrick's problematic girlfriend. Seen her. And that, somehow, was more frightening than anything else.
The hotel ballroom was impeccable. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling like frozen constellations, reflecting golden light onto perfectly arranged tables, each with white flower arrangements that seemed to have been positioned by an architect, not a florist. Executives circulated with glasses in hand, talking in low tones about mergers, markets, projections. Everything was polished, controlled, flawless. Eloise adjusted the camera hanging around her neck and took a deep breath. She was nervous, not the kind that paralyzes, but the kind that sharpens the senses. She had spent the last few days preparing, reviewing angles, studying light, mentally rehearsing every movement. Patrick had complained, of course, said she was obsessed, that she was neglecting the house, that it was just a job and she was acting like it would change her life. Maybe he was right, or maybe he was afraid it actually would. Grant saw her as soon as she walked in. He was standing next to Everett Malone, his assistant and right-hand man, a 41-year-old with thin-framed glasses and an impressive ability to solve problems before Grant even realized they existed. Everett followed his boss's gaze and raised an eyebrow. "Is that her?" Grant nodded, not taking his eyes off Eloise. There was something about the way she moved through the ballroom, discreet but attentive, like a bird observing its surroundings before landing. She wasn't trying to fit in. She was trying to understand. Grant said, "I'm going to say hello," already walking away. Everett smiled crookedly. He knew that tone. It was the tone of someone about to complicate his own life.
"Eloise!" His voice made her turn. She smiled, and Grant noticed it was a different smile from the one at the coffee shop, more contained, more professional, as if she had put on invisible armor for the night. "Grant, hi. Thanks again for the opportunity." He waved his hand, dismissing the formality. "Relax. Just do what you do best. Capture what no one else sees." She nodded, adjusting the camera strap. "Can I start?" "Go ahead. The event is yours." And then he did something unexpected. He stayed. Didn't go back to the executives, didn't dive back into strategic conversations, stayed there, watching Eloise work. And it was mesmerizing. She moved through the ballroom as if dancing a silent choreography. She clicked at moments no one else noticed, a man's hand gently squeezing another's shoulder in a gesture of support, an older woman's tired smile as she adjusted her earring before returning to conversation, the distorted reflection of a wine glass on the glass table. These weren't obvious photos. They were fragments of truth hidden in a night of appearances. Grant realized he was smiling.
When was the last time he had stopped to observe something like this? When was the last time something or someone pulled him out of autopilot? He didn't know, but he knew Eloise was doing it to him now.
During a break, she approached one of the tall windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. The city glowed outside, lights flickering over the dark water, and Eloise lowered her camera for a moment, just looking. Grant approached, silent. Tired? She startled slightly, but relaxed when she saw him. No, just absorbing. Sometimes I need to stop photographing to actually see, you know? He understood, more than she knew. I do that with numbers, he said, surprising himself with the honesty. I get so obsessed with metrics, growth, results, that I forget to ask why I'm doing this, what for. Eloise turned to him, and there was something in her eyes, understanding, empathy, connection. And have you figured out the answer? Grant hesitated. No one ever asked him that. Not yet, but I think I'm starting to look. They stood there for a few minutes, side by side, looking at the city through the glass. They didn't need to fill the silence with words. It was comfortable, real, different from everything Grant was used to at events like this, where every conversation was a disguised negotiation, every smile is strategy. With Eloise, there was no game. There was just presence. She broke the silence first. I should get back. I still have a lot to capture. He nodded, but didn't want her to go. Wanted to stay there, in that bubble suspended between work and something undefinable. Eloise, he said, before he could censor himself, after the event's over, would you like to have dinner with me? Not professionally, just because I'd like to get to know you better. She held her breath, counted to 5, and this time didn't go back. The problem was Patrick. The problem was always Patrick. Eloise knew she should say no, knew that accepting that invitation meant crossing a line she didn't have the courage to name. But when she looked at Grant, at this man who saw her, who listened to her, who didn't diminish her, the word that came out was different. I'd love to. And the next second, she was already wondering how she'd hide this, how she'd explain, how she'd keep two worlds separate when they were already starting to collide inside her.
The coffee Grant chose was small, almost hidden between 2 old bookstores in the heart of Charleston, the kind of place tourists didn't find, and locals protected like a secret. Eloise arrived 10 minutes late, rare for her because Patrick had called 3 times asking where she was, and she had to make up a story about a demanding client who wanted to review photos in person. The lie came out too easily, frighteningly easily. When she walked in and saw Grant sitting by the window, flipping through a book he clearly wasn't reading, something inside her quieted. It was like coming home after an exhausting day. And that should have frightened her, but it didn't. Sorry I'm late. She slid into the chair across from him, and Grant looked up with a smile that came slowly but came whole. No problem. I would have waited as long as it took. There was something in those words, an unspoken promise, a patience she wasn't used to receiving. They ordered coffee, and the conversation flowed as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. He talked about the pressure of leading a fast-growing company, about how sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that everything could crumble at any second. She talked about photography, about how each image was an attempt to freeze something true before the world destroyed it. And then, for the first time in months, Eloise laughed. Not a contained, polite laugh, a genuine laugh that started in her chest and escaped before she could control it.
Grant watched that laugh as if it were the rarest thing in the world. And maybe it was, because Eloise hadn't laughed like that in so long that even she had forgotten what it was like. "You should do that more," he said, resting his chin on his hand. "What? Laugh. Really smile. You look different." She felt her face heat up and looked away at her coffee cup, tracing the rim with her finger. "I don't have many reasons lately." The honesty escaped before she could hold it back, and Grant noticed the crack in her voice, the shadow that passed through her eyes. He leaned forward, his voice low, careful. "Eloise, are you okay?" She opened her mouth to answer,
to lie, to deflect, to do what she always did. But then the cafe door opened and the world collapsed. Patrick entered like a contained storm, his eyes sweeping the space until he found her. Eloise felt her blood freeze. How did he know? How did he always know? He walked to the table with heavy steps, and she stood instinctively, as if bracing for a blow. "Patrick, I can explain—" "Explain?" His voice was low, dangerous, controlled enough not to draw attention, but sharp as broken glass. "You told me you were with a client, that you were working, and I find you here, laughing, having coffee with— Who is this?" Grant stood too, and Eloise realized he was taller than Patrick, broader in the shoulders. But Patrick had something Grant didn't, a rage that burned slowly, smoldering inside before exploding.
"I'm Grant Lawson," he said, extending his hand in a diplomatic attempt to defuse the situation. Patrick looked at the outstretched hand as if it were something disgusting. "I didn't ask you your name. I asked you who you are. To her." He pointed at Eloise, who was pale, trembling. Grant lowered his hand and something changed in his posture, still calm but firm. "I'm someone who hired her for a job, and now we're talking. That's all." Patrick laughed, that humorless laugh Eloise knew so well, the one that came before something bad. "That's all? Look at her face, buddy. She's in love. And you're taking advantage of a woman in a relationship." The word relationship came out like a chain, heavy and cold, tying Eloise in place. Grant turned to her, confused, seeking a denial that didn't come. Because it couldn't come. Because it was true. She was in a relationship, trapped, chained, and she had hidden it from him. "Eloise." The disappointment in Grant's voice hurt more than any of Patrick's yelling. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. Patrick took advantage of the silence. "Yeah, she didn't tell you, did she? Because that's how she is. Pretends to be this poor thing, this sensitive artist, but deep down, she's just a liar." He grabbed her arm, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to mark territory. "Let's go, Eloise. Enough wasting time here." She looked at Grant one last time, and what she saw in those eyes broke her. Disappointment, sadness, and worse, understanding. He understood. Understood that she was trapped. Understood that she had chosen to lie. Understood everything. And that made it all even more painful.
Grant took a step back, creating space, and his voice came out low, controlled but carrying something he couldn't completely hide. "If you need anything, Eloise, you have my number." Patrick laughed again, pulling her toward the door. "She won't need anything you can offer." And then they left, leaving Grant alone in that small cafe with two still steaming cups on the table and the feeling that something precious had just slipped through his fingers. He sat down again, his hands trembling slightly, not from anger but from something he hadn't felt in years. Helplessness. And for the first time since he'd built his empire of control and perfection, Grant Lawson didn't know what to do.
3 weeks, 21 days of absolute silence. Grant tried to work, tried to focus on numbers, meetings, decisions that moved the millions. But every time he looked at his phone, he expected to see her name. Every time he passed by that cafe hidden between the bookstores, he slowed down, as if she might be inside, waiting. Everett noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You need to stop looking at the door every 5 minutes," he said one afternoon, adjusting his glasses while they reviewed contracts. Grant sighed, running his hair through his hair. "I just don't understand how someone stays in a relationship like that." Everett watched him for a long moment before responding. "Sometimes, Grant, people stay because they don't know they can leave, or because they believe they don't deserve better." The words echoed. Grant knew that feeling, knew it intimately. Eloise, meanwhile, was crumbling in slow motion. Patrick wouldn't leave her alone for even 5 minutes.
He checked her phone, tracked every movement, asked questions about every photo she edited. Who's this person? Why did you photograph this? Where were you when you took this? The questions came disguised as curiosity, but they were handcuffs, and she was tired. So tired. Delilah tried calling 3 times, but Patrick always appeared at the exact moment, saying she was busy, that she'd call back later. She never called back. One night, after Patrick finally fell asleep, Eloise locked herself in the bathroom and looked at her own reflection in the mirror. Didn't recognize herself. Her eyes were sunken, dull, her skin pale. She looked like a faded photograph of herself. And it was there, sitting on the cold bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, that something inside her finally broke.
The next day, while Patrick was at work, Eloise did something she'd been putting off for too long. She called Delilah. Her friend answered on the second ring, her voice loaded with concern mixed with relief. "Eloise? Thank God. I was so worried. I need to get out, Delilah." Eloise's voice came out hoarse, broken. I can't take it anymore. I can't breathe." Delilah didn't hesitate. "Where are you? I'll come get you now." "No, I need to do this myself. But can you stay on the phone with me? Just be here while you break up with him," Delilah completed, firm. "Yes, I'll stay. I won't hang up, I promise." And she didn't hang up. She stayed there, on the other end of the line, breathing together, giving silent strength, while Eloise gathered her things, some clothes, the camera, important documents, and put everything in a small suitcase. When Patrick got home that night, he found Eloise sitting in the living room, the suitcase beside her. She was shaking, but she was there, standing, firm. He stopped at the door, his eyes going from the suitcase to her, then back to the suitcase. "What's this?" "I'm leaving, Patrick." The words came out simple, direct, no beating around the bush. He took a step inside, closing the door behind him with calculated care. "You're not going anywhere, Eloise. We're going to talk, you're going to calm down, and tomorrow this will seem ridiculous." "No!" She stood up, gripping the suitcase handle. "I'm already calm. I've already thought about it. I've already decided. It's over." That's when Patrick changed. The mask of concern fell, and what remained was pure rage. "Over? You think you can live without me? You're nothing, Eloise. Without me, you'll realize how weak you are, how much you need someone to hold you up."
She felt the tears coming, but didn't let them fall. Not this time. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am weak, but I'd rather be weak and free than strong and trapped." Patrick took a step toward her, but Eloise was already moving to the door. He didn't physically hold her back, knew that would be crossing a line he couldn't come back from. Instead, he threw words like stones. "You'll come back. You always come back, because deep down, you know no one else will want you." Eloise opened the door, the hallway light flooding into the dark apartment. She turned one last time, and her voice came out low but firm. "I don't need anyone to want me, Patrick. I need me to want me." And then she left, leaving behind 3 years of her life and a man who never loved her, only possessed her. She drove without destination for almost an hour until she found herself parking in front of Grant's company building. She didn't know why she was there, hadn't planned it, but her body knew, her heart knew. She needed to see him, needed someone to confirm that she'd done the right thing, that she wasn't crazy, that she deserved more. She went up to the 10th floor, and the receptionist, who already knew her from the event, let her pass without many questions. Maybe there was something in her face, something that said, "Please don't make me explain right now." When she knocked on Grant's office door, it was Everett who answered. He looked at her, at the red eyes, at the suitcase still in her hand, at the contained desperation, and simply nodded. "He's here. Come in."
Grant had his back turned, looking out the window at the illuminated city, hands in his pockets. He turned when he heard the door, and seeing her, his whole face changed. He didn't say anything, didn't need to, just opened his arms. And Eloise,
who had held everything in for so long, finally fell apart. She ran to him and buried her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Grant held her tight, one hand on the back of her head, the other on her back, holding her as if he could protect her from everything that had already happened. "I'm sorry," she murmured against his shirt. "I'm sorry for lying, for not telling you, for—" "Shh, no." He pulled back, just enough to look into her eyes. "You don't need to apologize for surviving, Eloise." And it was in that moment, in those simple but devastating words, that she realized Grant understood. Not because he judged, but because he too had his own wounds.
Grant made coffee, not because Eloise asked, but because it was all he knew how to do in that moment. Something concrete, simple, human. She was sitting on the leather couch in his office, wrapped in a coat he'd lent her, because even in Charleston's heat, she was shivering. He placed the steaming cup on the coffee table in front of her and sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, but present. "You don't have to talk now," he said, his voice low. "But when you want to, I'll be here." Eloise held the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth pass through the porcelain and heat her cold palms. And then, slowly, she began to speak. She told him about the 3 years with Patrick, about how in the beginning he seemed attentive, but gradually the attention became control, about how she lost friends, lost confidence, lost herself. And Grant listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't try to fix, just listened. When she finished, silence hung between them like a thick cloud. Grant looked at his own hands, fingers interlaced, and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something." Eloise looked up, eyes still red but attentive. He'd never shared this with anyone, not even with Everett, who knew everything about his professional life, but nothing about his scars. "I grew up poor, very poor. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. And when I was 10, she met a man, Frank. He moved into our house, and he was like Patrick. Didn't hit, but destroyed with words. Said I'd never be anything, that I was a burden, that my mom would be better off without me."
Eloise felt her chest tighten. She reached out and lightly touched his arm. A small gesture, but one that said everything. Grant looked at that hand, that delicate touch, and continued. "I spent my entire adolescence trying to prove he was wrong. Studied like crazy, worked since I was 14, built this company from nothing. Thought if I was successful enough, rich enough, perfect enough, his voice would finally shut up. But it didn't, Eloise. Because he planted something in me that I carried for years, the idea that I'd never be good enough." He turned to her, and there were tears in the corners of his eyes too. "And then I met you, and for the first time in decades, I wondered if maybe being alive was more important than being perfect." It was Eloise's turn to hug him. She leaned in and pulled him close, and there, in that quiet office on the 10th floor, 2 broken people held each other, not as saviors, but as survivors, as someone who finally found another human being capable of looking at their wounds without flinching. They stayed like that for long minutes, breathing together, letting the shared pain transform into something lighter. When they pulled apart, Grant wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and gave a crooked smile. "Sorry, I'm usually more composed." Eloise laughed, a wet, broken laugh, but real. "I think we're past the stage of pretending everything's okay." True. In the following weeks, something began to change. Grant didn't try to save Eloise. He learned early on that wasn't what she needed. Instead, he was just present. When she decided to see a therapist, he researched options and sent her a list, but left the decision in her hands. When she had to go back to the apartment with Patrick to get the rest of her things, he offered company, but accepted when she said she needed to do it alone.
And when she finally rented a small, bright studio in downtown Charleston, a space that was just hers, with large windows and perfect natural light for developing photos, he showed up with a fern plant and a note, "To new beginnings."
Eloise began to flourish in a way she didn't recognize. Therapy was difficult. Every week she left sessions emotionally drained, as if she'd run a marathon on the inside. But it was also liberating. She began to understand patterns, to name emotions, to rebuild her self-esteem brick by brick. Her work changed too. The photos she took now had a different quality, raw, more honest, less concerned with pleasing. She photographed a series titled Breathe, capturing women in moments of everyday simplicity. A mother making coffee in the morning, a grandmother sewing, a young woman dancing alone in the living room. They weren't perfect photos. They were true photos. And people noticed. Her work began to be shared, recommended, sought after. Grant changed too. He started working less, not because the company needed him less, but because he realized his life needed more. He began leaving the office before 7, walking through Charleston's historic streets without hurry, reading books that had nothing to do with business. And he spent time with Eloise. Simple dinners, long conversations, walks along the harbor. It wasn't romance yet, or maybe it was, but the slow kind, the kind that builds on friendship and respect before anything else. One night, while walking under the blooming magnolias, he stopped and turned to her. "Eloise, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be completely honest with me." She stopped too, heart racing. "What?" He held her hands, looking deep into her eyes. "When you're ready, no rush, no pressure, in your own time, would you like to try this, the two of us, for real?" Eloise felt the tears coming, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude, relief, hope. She squeezed his hands. "Grant, I'm already trying. Every day I wake up and choose to live, I'm trying. And yes, I want to try with you." He smiled, that slow, complete smile she'd learned to love, and pulled her into a hug. There was no dramatic kiss, no grand declaration. There were just two wounded human beings choosing to build something new together. And for the first time in years, Eloise felt that life finally fit in her chest, not because it was perfect, but because, finally, it was hers.
5 months later, Eloise's studio was fuller than ever, not with people but with life. Photos covered the walls, each one telling a story of new beginnings, of courage, of women who had found their own voices. She sat there every morning with a cup of coffee, looking through the wide window at Charleston waking up, and took a deep breath, really breathed. Grant spent almost every weekend with her, but they kept their own spaces, their own rhythms, because true love, they had learned, doesn't suffocate, it expands. They still had fears, still carried scars, but now they had something more important, the choice to face them together without losing themselves in the process. Just as Eloise discovered that love can transform everything, each of us also carries that power of transformation within ourselves. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over and believe in love. Not just romantic love, but self-love, the courage to choose freedom even when it's frightening, the strength to ask for help when the weight becomes too much. Every person who reads, who watches, who is moved by stories like this is, in some way, recognizing within themselves the same journey. The journey of finding yourself, of valuing yourself, of allowing yourself to live. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Share it with someone who needs to hear that starting over is possible. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience, with each episode, emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, every story is an invitation to feel deeply, to believe in the power of true love and in the beauty of new beginnings. And this was just one of the many stories that will still move you here.